The meeting ended 20 minutes ago, but you're still sitting in your car in the parking lot. Not because you forgot something.
Because you said something.
Not something cruel. Not something untrue. Just something that filled the silence when silence was exactly what was needed. And the moment it left your mouth, you knew. You knew the other person had more to say. You knew they were not finished. But the quiet felt uncomfortable, so you filled it. And now whatever they were about to say is gone. We do this more than we realize.
We fill.
We add. We rush past the pause because somewhere along the way we learned that silence was awkward, that it meant something was wrong, that the person who speaks first is the one who cares most. And so we talk. We talk through other people's sentences. We talk through our own thoughts before they are fully formed. We talk past the very connections we are trying to build. What this is costing us is not small. It is costing us the depth of our relationships. It is costing us our reputation in rooms where the quietest person is often the most respected. It is costing us the kind of conversations that change how two people see each other forever. And underneath all of it, it is costing us the version of ourselves that knows how to be still. That is about to change. Because silence is not empty. It never was. And by the time this audiobook is finished, you will know exactly how to use it.
I know where you are right now.
Maybe not physically, but I know the feeling. You have been in conversations your whole life and somehow still walk away from too many of them feeling like something important was missed. Like the person in front of you was never fully reached. Like you were present but not quite connected. And you have probably wondered, quietly, honestly, whether the problem is you. Whether you talk too much or not enough, or whether you even know how to truly listen anymore in a world that rewards the loudest voice in the room. That feeling is not a character flaw. It is a signal. And this audiobook is the answer to it. Here is what I want to name directly before we go any further, because naming it is the first step to releasing it. You are navigating a world that has been quietly training you to be a poor listener for years. Every notification, every scroll, every conversation held over text, while another one plays in your ear, has been eroding your capacity for deep attention. And the cost is showing up everywhere. In the relationship where you feel more like roommates than partners. In the friendship that used to run deep, but now stays surface level. In the meeting where you are physically present but mentally composing your response before the other person has finished their sentence. In the argument that never resolves because both people are talking and nobody is truly hearing. In the loneliness you feel even in rooms full of people, a loneliness that is not about the number of people around you, but about the quality of contact between you. This is the pain of a person who has never been taught what listening actually is. And it is more common than you know. Most people confuse hearing with listening. Most people confuse silence with weakness. Most people have never been shown that the most powerful thing you can do in a conversation is stop, and stay stopped long enough for the truth to emerge. This audiobook is going to fix that. Not with theory. Not with a list of tips to memorize. With a genuine, deep, practical rewiring of how you show up in every conversation that matters to you. By the time we reach the final chapter, you will understand the psychology of silence at a level most people never access. You will know how to use stillness as a tool for trust, for influence, for intimacy, and for inner clarity. You will have walked through 9 specific dimensions of intentional silence, each one building on the last, and you will carry a set of practices that work in real life, in real time with real people. This is going to require something from you too. Not perfection. Not an overnight transformation. Just a willingness to sit with a little discomfort as we go. Because some of what we are about to explore will ask you to let go of habits that feel very natural right now. habits that have been keeping you busy, but holding you back.
Step in with me.
What we are building here is worth every minute. Chapter 1: What silence actually is and why we have been afraid of it. You are at dinner with someone you care about. The conversation slows. A natural pause opens up between the last sentence and whatever comes next. And before that pause can breathe, before it can become anything, one of you reaches for your phone. Not because anything important just arrived, just because the quiet felt like a problem that needed solving. We have all done it. The instinct to fill silence is so deeply wired into us that we rarely question it. We just reach for words, for humor, for our devices, anything to cover the gap. And in doing so, we miss something that the gap was trying to give us. Here is what I have come to understand about silence after years of observing how human beings connect and disconnect with one another. Silence is not the absence of communication. It is a form of communication, one of the oldest and most powerful forms we have. The pause after someone tells you something hard is not dead air. It is acknowledgement. It is the nonverbal signal that says, "I heard you. That mattered. I am not rushing past it." Research from communication psychology consistently shows that people feel most heard not in the moments when we respond with the perfect words, but in the moments when we pause long enough to demonstrate that what they said actually landed. The late psychiatrist Milton Erickson, one of the most influential figures in therapeutic communication in the 20th century, built an entire methodology around the strategic use of silence, showing that a well-placed pause creates more trust than almost any verbal technique. Consider Abraham Lincoln, a man who navigated the most fractured political landscape in American history and somehow held the room even in moments of silence. Those who worked alongside him described a man who listened with visible patience, who let others finish, who paused before responding, who made people feel that their words had been genuinely received before he offered his own. His silence was not passivity. It was precision. It was the silence of someone who understood that the person speaking to you will tell you everything you need to know, if you give them the space to do it. In your own life, this shows up in the conversations where you already sense you are not doing it well. The ones where you are nodding but composing your reply in your head. The ones where you interrupt not out of rudeness but out of excitement, out of anxiety, out of that old learned instinct that silence means you are failing to connect. You are not failing. You're just running an outdated program. And programs can be updated. The practice I want to leave you with from this chapter is one you can use today. The next time a conversation reaches a natural pause, whether that is in person, on a phone call, or even in a voice message, count silently to 3 before you respond.
1, 2,
3. Not to be dramatic, not to seem mysterious, but to give the other person the room to continue if they have more to say. You will be amazed how often they do. And how much more important what they say next is than whatever you were about to add. Silence is not the gap between conversations. It is the conversation itself at its deepest level. And once you truly understand what it is, you will never want to rush past it again. The next thing we need to examine is why, despite everything, filling that silence has felt so necessary for so long. Chapter 2: The Neuroscience of Noise. Why your brain hates silence and what to do about it. You wake up and the first thing you do is reach for your phone. Not to check anything specific.
Just to check.
And before you have been awake for 60 seconds, there is already sound. A notification, a headline, a voice from a podcast, the background hum of a television you turned on for company. By the time you sit down for breakfast, your nervous system has already processed more stimulation than a previous generation would have encountered in an entire morning. And somehow, even with all of that, you still feel restless, still feel like something is missing. This is not a coincidence. This is the neuroscience of a brain that has been trained to fear its own quiet. What I have found fascinating about the science here is how recent our understanding of it truly is. The brain has a system called the default mode network, a set of regions that activate not when we are doing something, but when we are doing nothing, when we are still, when we are quiet. For decades, neuroscientists assumed this network was basically background noise, irrelevant activity. Then researchers at Washington University in St. Louis began studying it more closely and discovered that this is actually where some of the brain's most important work happens. Self-reflection, emotional processing, empathy, the capacity to understand what another person is feeling. All of this happens in the silence of the default mode network. And every time we fill that silence with stimulation, with sound, with scrolling, with constant input, we interrupt the very process that makes us better at connecting with other human beings. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher who governed one of the most complex civilizations in human history, wrote in his private journals about returning to himself through silence. He wrote about the practice of withdrawing from the noise of public life, not as isolation but as maintenance, the way an athlete returns to rest so the body can repair and grow stronger. He understood instinctively what neuroscience has now confirmed, that the mind needs silence the way the body needs sleep. In your daily life, what this means is that your discomfort with silence in conversations is not a personality trait. It is a withdrawal symptom. Your nervous system has been so thoroughly conditioned by constant stimulation that the absence of noise registers as threat rather than gift. And so you talk, you fill, you add, not because you want to, but because the silence feels, at a biological level, like something is wrong. The practice for this chapter is a 2-minute silence ritual. Set a timer for 2 minutes, right now, or tonight before bed. No phone, no music, no background noise. Just you and the quiet. Do not try to meditate or achieve anything. Simply sit and allow the discomfort to be there without running from it. The first few times this will feel strange. That strangeness is the nervous system adjusting. By the third or fourth time, you'll begin to notice something underneath the discomfort, a kind of clarity that has been there all along, waiting. When your brain stops running from silence, it starts using it. And that changes everything about how you show up in conversation. But understanding the neuroscience is only the beginning. What we need next is to understand what happens specifically between two people when one of them truly stops and listens. Chapter 3: The Art of Deep Listening. How to hear what is not being said. Think about the last time someone truly listened to you. Not nodded politely. Not waited for their turn. Truly listened. Held eye contact. Stayed with you through the pauses. Did not jump to fix or reframe or relate it back to their own experience. Just listened. How did that feel? For most people, that experience is so rare, it is almost startling when it happens. The room feels different. You feel seen in a way that goes past words. And you find yourself saying things you did not know you were going to say, because the quality of their attention created a space safe enough for your deeper truth to emerge. Every one of us has had that experience, even if only once. And every one of us knows the difference between that and the kind of listening that is really just waiting. What I have come to understand is that deep listening is not a passive activity. It requires more presence than speaking does. When you are speaking, your brain is generating, selecting, and delivering. When you are truly listening, your brain is receiving, processing, tracking tone, reading body language, registering what is being emphasized and what is being avoided, noticing the gap between the words someone is using and the emotion underneath them. It is an act of sustained attention that most people have never been taught, and very few people practice consistently. The researcher and author Carl Rogers, who spent decades studying what creates genuine human change in therapeutic conversations, concluded that the single most transformative thing one human being can offer another is not advice, not expertise, not even empathy expressed in words. It is the experience of being fully heard without judgment. A well-known example of this quality of listening in action is the journalist and author Studs Terkel, who spent 60 years interviewing ordinary people from every walk of American life. What made his interviews extraordinary was not his questions. It was his listening. People said things to him that they had never said to anyone, not because he asked the perfect question, but because the depth of his attention made them feel that what they had to say was genuinely worth hearing. In your relationships, this matters more than you have probably been told. The arguments that never fully resolve, many of them are not about the content of the disagreement. They are about the felt absence of being heard. The partner who pulls away is often not asking for solutions. They are asking for someone to sit with them in the difficulty without rushing past it. The colleague who goes quiet in meetings is not disengaged. They are waiting to see if the room is safe enough for their real thoughts. The practice here is what I call the last sentence return. In your next significant conversation, after the other person finishes speaking, resist your first impulse to respond. Instead, gently reflect back the last meaningful thing they said, not as a question, not as a challenge, simply as confirmation. Something as simple as, "So, what you are really saying is that you felt left out of that decision." Then wait. What follows is almost always the most honest thing they will say in that entire conversation. Hearing what is not being said is the highest form of listening. And mastering it will transform every relationship you care about. Before we move forward, I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want your answer. Drop it in the comments right now. When was the last time you felt truly listened to, and what made it different from every other conversation? I read every comment, and your answer might shape the next audiobook we create together. Now, once you understand how to truly listen, the next question becomes, what do you do with the discomfort that silence brings to the other person? Chapter 4, Comfortable with Discomfort. How to sit in silence without flinching. There is a specific kind of conversation most of us dread. The one where you have asked a hard question, or someone has just told you something heavy, and now the silence is sitting between you like a third person in the room. And every second that passes feels like a countdown to something breaking. So you rush in. You offer a solution. You say, "I completely understand," before they have finished telling you what there is to understand. You do anything to end the discomfort of the pause. The irony is that in rushing to end the discomfort, you have ended the conversation too. Sitting with relational silence, the kind that happens not because there is nothing to say, but because what has just been said is large, is one of the least practiced and most valuable skills in human connection. And avoiding it has a specific cost. Every time you fill the silence too soon, you communicate something to the other person, even without meaning to. You communicate that their truth is too much for you, that the size of their emotion makes you uncomfortable, that your need to resolve the discomfort is greater than your willingness to be with them inside it. Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor whose work on meaning and human resilience has guided millions of people through their darkest periods, wrote about the power of what he called tragic optimism, the capacity to sit with suffering, with uncertainty, with the absence of resolution, and remain present rather than retreating. He did not teach people to escape discomfort. He taught people to face it fully, because it is only in the full facing of something that it begins to lose its hold on us. That principle applies to the silence of a difficult conversation as much as it applies to the hardest moments of a human life. In your relationships, the person who can sit in uncomfortable silence without flinching is the person everyone eventually turns to when things get real. Not because they have the answers, because they have proven they will not leave. That they can handle the weight of what you carry without needing to lighten it prematurely. The practice for this chapter is a silence tolerance exercise. The next time you are in a conversation that goes quiet in a heavy moment, place both feet flat on the floor, take a slow breath, and give the silence 5 full seconds before you speak. Count them silently if you need to. You will likely feel the urge to fill that space at around second 2 or 3. Let the urge be there without acting on it. What you are training is the ability to be a steady presence in the moments that matter most, and that steadiness is what people remember long after the words have faded. Discomfort is not the signal to retreat. It is the signal that something real is happening. Stay in it long enough, and you will discover what that something is. Chapter 5: Silence as a Leadership Tool. Why the most powerful people in the room speak last. Walk into any room where decisions are being made and pay attention to who speaks first. Now pay attention to who speaks last. The person who speaks first is often the most anxious. The person who speaks last is often the most influential. This is not always true, but it is true far more often than most people realize. And understanding why it is true will change how you show up in every professional setting for the rest of your career. This dynamic has nothing to do with dominance or performance. It has to do with information. What I have observed consistently is that the person who speaks last has the advantage of having heard everything. They know what has already been said. They know where the agreement lies and where the friction is. They know which ideas have been received well and which have quietly landed wrong. And when they finally speak, they are able to address the room at its actual level, not the level they assumed it was at before they heard anything. That is not a personality style. That is a strategy. And it is available to anyone willing to cultivate the discipline of listening before speaking. The Pulitzer Prize-winning author Doris Kearns Goodwin wrote extensively about Abraham Lincoln's approach to cabinet meetings, and the portrait she drew was of a leader who created space for every voice in the room before offering his own. Lincoln understood that his role was not to dominate the conversation but to synthesize it. His silence early in a meeting was not passivity. It was intelligence gathering. And when he finally spoke, people listened differently because they knew his words had been shaped by everything he had heard. In your professional life, this looks like being the person who asks one more question before giving an opinion, who responds to a tense email with a phone call rather than a reply, who pauses visibly in a meeting before speaking, signaling that what comes next has been considered rather than merely reacted. These are small behaviors with large reputations attached to them. The practice here is the speak last experiment. In your next meeting or group conversation, commit to being the last person to offer your opinion on the central question being discussed. Not silently. You can ask clarifying questions, invite others to speak, nod, acknowledge. But hold your core position until you have heard everyone else. Then speak once, clearly, with reference to something someone else said that you're building on. Notice how the room responds differently to that than to the person who spoke first and loudest. Leadership is not the loudest voice. Leadership is the clearest one. And the clearest voice is almost always the one that listened the most before it spoke. Chapter 6: The Silent Language of Intimacy. How stillness deepens love and connection. Long-term couples often describe a particular kind of quiet that develops between them over the years. Not the cold silence of unresolved arguments. not the awkward silence of strangers. A different kind entirely. The quiet of two people who've been together long enough that they do not need every moment filled with words. A shared evening where the conversation rises and falls, and the silences between are as comfortable as the words. That quality, the ability to be quiet together without strain, is one of the most underrated signs of genuine intimacy between people. And yet it is exactly this quality that most couples never develop, because they never learn how to stop performing connection and start experiencing it. What I want to speak to you about in this chapter is the difference between performed presence and actual presence. Performed presence is what happens when you are physically with someone but mentally elsewhere, composing, reviewing, planning, replaying. You say the right things. You nod at the right moments. But some part of you is somewhere else entirely. And the person you are with can feel it, even if they cannot name it. Actual presence is the quality of being fully arrived. Body here, mind here, attention fully given. It requires silence of a specific kind, not external silence necessarily, but internal silence. The quieting of your own mental noise long enough to actually receive the person in front of you. The Vietnamese monk and teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, whose teachings on mindful listening have reached millions of people across the world, described the act of giving someone your full presence as the greatest gift one human being can offer another. He taught that listening with the sole intention of relieving the other person's suffering, without agenda, without counter-argument forming, is itself a form of love. Not the romantic love of grand gestures, but the deep love of genuine witness. In your closest relationships, this changes everything. The partner who feels unseen is rarely asking for more grand gestures. They are asking for more moments of being genuinely seen in the ordinary ones. The friend who keeps things surface level is rarely protecting a great secret. They are measuring whether the room is safe enough for depth. And the room becomes safe through quality of attention, through the willingness to be with someone without needing to change, fix, or redirect what they are bringing. The practice here is the 5-minute undivided attention exercise.
Choose someone important in your life.
Set a time. After dinner, before bed, during a walk. For 5 minutes, give them your full and undivided attention. No phone visible. No planning your next sentence. Ask one real question, and then simply listen, fully, quietly, for the entirety of their answer. Do not respond immediately. Let their words settle. Then, ask one follow-up that shows you genuinely heard what they said. 5 minutes of this kind of attention is worth more than a week of surface-level presence. Intimacy is not built in the extraordinary moments. It is built in the ordinary ones, given fully, without distraction. And once you know how to bring this quality to your closest relationships, you will want to bring it everywhere. If what you have been hearing throughout this audiobook is already beginning to shift something inside you, subscribe to this channel right now and hit the notification bell, because the next audiobook goes even deeper into how to stop seeking external validation and find the kind of inner peace that does not depend on anyone else's approval. You do not want to miss it. Now, let us talk about the silence that happens not between two people, but within one. Because the most important conversations you will ever have are the ones you have with yourself. Chapter 7, The Inner Silence. How to quiet the noise in your own mind. It is 2 a.m. and you are awake. Not because of noise outside. Because of the noise inside. The loop of the conversation you had that did not go the way you wanted. The plan you were second-guessing. The list of things you did not do. And the worry about whether you are enough, whether you are on the right path, whether you are wasting time, or moving too slowly, or making the wrong choices. The internal monologue runs so constantly that for many people it is the loudest thing in their life, and they have stopped noticing it. This is the noise that silence, real, practiced, intentional silence, begins to heal. What I have come to understand about the inner voice is that it is not the same thing as thinking. Thinking is directed, purposeful, generative. The inner monologue that most people live with is something different. It is compulsive, repetitive, and largely outside conscious control. The spiritual teacher and author Eckhart Tolle, whose work on presence and inner stillness has been read by tens of millions of people across more than 50 languages, described this compulsive thinking as the most fundamental source of human suffering, not because the thoughts themselves are always terrible, but because the inability to stop having them prevents us from ever arriving in the present moment where life is actually happening. The practice he described as the most direct path through this is not thinking better thoughts. It is noticing the thinker, creating a sliver of inner space, a moment of witnessing the thoughts rather than being them, and in that moment, accessing the quiet that exists underneath the noise. In your daily experience, what this means is that the voice in your head that narrates, criticizes, worries, and replays is not the full truth of who you are. It is a habit, a very loud, very convincing habit, but a habit nonetheless. And like all habits, it can be interrupted, redirected, and gradually replaced with something more useful. The inner silence practice for this chapter is what I call the observer breath. When the mental noise rises, especially in a moment of stress, conflict, or late-night anxiety, bring your full attention to a single breath, not to calm down, not to escape the thought, simply to notice that the thought is there without being consumed by it. Breathe in for 4 counts. Hold for 2. Breathe out for 6. Then return your attention to the room, the moment, the physical sensation of where you are. You are training the part of your mind that observes rather than reacts. And that part of your mind is the part that makes every decision that actually matters. The quieter you become inside, the more clearly you see outside. And the more clearly you see, the better every conversation, every decision, and every relationship becomes. Chapter 8. Strategic Silence. When not speaking is the most powerful thing you can do. There is a specific situation most people handle badly. Someone says something that is wrong, or unfair, or designed to provoke. And the immediate biological impulse is to correct it, defend against it, match its energy. And in the 10 seconds that follow that impulse, the entire direction of the relationship can change, either because you acted on it or because you did not. Strategic silence is the art of choosing not to respond in the moments when not responding is the most powerful thing you can do. This is not the same as avoidance. It is not the same as conflict aversion. It is not passivity dressed up in language. Strategic silence is an active, conscious decision to withhold your response long enough to ensure that when you do speak, you are speaking from intention rather than reaction. The difference between those two things, response from intention versus response from reaction, is the difference between a conversation that builds and a conversation that damages. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus, who was born into slavery and went on to become one of the most widely cited philosophers of the ancient world, taught a deceptively simple principle. The only thing within our control is our own faculty of choice. Not what happens to us, not what other people say or do, only our response to it. He described the gap between stimulus and response as the most important space in a human life, and argued that the entire goal of philosophy was to enlarge that gap. Strategic silence is the practical application of that teaching. It is the moment you choose to stay in the gap rather than immediately filling it. In your relationships and professional life, There are specific moments where this skill changes outcomes dramatically. The partner who makes a comment in the heat of an argument that is designed to provoke. The colleague who takes credit for your work in a meeting. The family member who pushes a button so old and familiar that your response is already halfway out before the thought is fully formed. In every one of these situations, the most effective thing you can often do is nothing. Not forever. Not to avoid the conversation, but long enough to choose your words rather than having your words chosen for you by your nervous system. The practice here is what I call the strategic delay. The next time you feel the immediate impulse to respond to something charged, a message, a comment, a criticism, implement a deliberate delay of at least 5 minutes before responding. During those 5 minutes, ask yourself one question: what outcome do I actually want from this exchange? Then build your response backwards from that outcome rather than forwards from your initial reaction. This single habit, practiced consistently, will save relationships and careers. Silence in the right moment is not weakness. It is the highest form of self-command. And self-command is the foundation on which everything else in this audiobook rests. Chapter 9: Listening as a Superpower. How to build influence, trust, and respect through stillness. Every person you have ever admired for their presence had this quality. Not necessarily the loudest voice, not necessarily the most confident speaker, but something that made the room feel different when they were truly attending to it. A quality of focus, of gravity, of being so fully present that their attention felt like a form of respect. That quality has a name. It is called active listening, and in a world that has almost entirely forgotten how to do it, it has become one of the rarest and most valued human skills in existence. The person who listens well does not just make others feel good. They gather more information, build deeper trust, catch the subtext that others miss, and make decisions informed by reality rather than assumption. What I find most compelling about this is how consistently the research confirms it. The author and leadership consultant Dale Carnegie, whose observations about human nature and communication have influenced more people's professional lives than almost any writer of the 20th century, concluded after decades of study that the single most important key to influence over other human beings is to make them feel genuinely heard and valued. Not to be impressive, not to be persuasive, not to be expert, simply to listen in a way that communicates, "You matter, what you say matters, and I am here for it." That quality of listening transforms how people see you, not because you have told them anything impressive, but because you have made them feel something real. In your professional and personal life, this translates into a specific kind of reputation. The person who listens well becomes the person people bring their real problems to. The person they trust with sensitive information. The person whose opinion they most want when the decision is hard. Not because you lobbied for that role, because your listening earned it. And the irony is that the people who try hardest to appear impressive, who speak most, assert most, perform most, are consistently rated as less trustworthy and less influential than those who speak less and listen more. The practice for this chapter is what I call the name and value technique. In your next significant conversation, listen for the one thing the other person seems most invested in, the thread they keep returning to, the emotion underneath the words, the concern they have not quite named directly. Then add a natural moment in the conversation, name it for them, not as analysis, as acknowledgement. Something like, "It sounds like what you are really concerned about is whether this decision respects the work you put in." Then stop. Let them respond. What you will see in that moment is a visible shift, a release of tension, a deepening of the conversation, a trust that was not fully there before. Listening is not just a communication skill. It is a leadership strategy, a relationship accelerator, and a form of respect so powerful that people remember it for years. Use it with intention and use it generously. If this audiobook is adding real value to your life, do not keep it to yourself. Share it with one person who needs to hear this today. Forward it to someone in your life who is struggling in their relationships, at work, or with their inner dialogue. You might not realize it, but that one share could genuinely change someone's life. And now, we bring everything together. Because knowing these tools is one thing, but knowing how to carry them forward from here is something else entirely. Chapter 10: The Life You Build in the Silence. You are sitting somewhere again. Maybe it is a parking lot. Maybe it is a kitchen table after a long day. Maybe it is 2 a.m. with the house quiet around you. And the silence that used to feel like a problem, that used to make you reach for your phone or rush to fill with words, sits a little differently now. Not because the discomfort is completely gone, but because you have begun to understand what it is. And more importantly, what it can do. That restlessness you felt at the beginning of this audiobook, that sense of conversations missed, connections that stayed surface level, a version of yourself that never quite arrived in the rooms that mattered. That was not a failure. It was the beginning of awareness. And awareness is where everything changes. We began by reframing what silence actually is, not absence, not awkwardness, but a form of communication that carries more meaning than most words ever will. We moved into the neuroscience of why your brain has been running from quiet and why training it to return to stillness unlocks the very capacities that make you better with people. We explored deep listening, not the performance of it but the practice, and discovered that being fully heard is one of the rarest and most transformative gifts one human being can give another. We sat with the discomfort that real presence requires and learned that the ability to stay in difficult silence without flinching is what builds the trust that spoken reassurance never can. We watched how the most influential people in rooms and in history use silence as a strategic tool, not to withhold but to deepen, to gather, to respond from intention rather than reaction. We brought all of that into the place it matters most, our closest relationships, and found that intimacy is not built in the extraordinary moments, but in the ordinary ones given fully, without distraction. We turned inward and confronted the loudest silence of all, the noise inside our own minds, and found a practice for creating the kind of inner stillness that changes everything we see and do. We claimed the power of choosing not to respond in the moments when not responding is the most strategic and courageous thing we can do. And finally, we named listening for what it truly is, not a passive background skill, but one of the most powerful forces available to any human being who wants to lead, to love, and to be trusted at depth. Here is the honest truth I want to offer you before we close. This is not a linear journey. The tools in this audiobook will feel easy on the days when your nervous system is regulated and life is manageable. And they will feel almost impossible on the days when you are exhausted, triggered, overwhelmed, or running on empty. Old habits will return. You will fill the silence when you meant to hold it. You will respond from reaction when you intended to respond from intention. You will be in a conversation with someone you love and realize halfway through that you have not truly heard a single word they said. That is not failure. That is being human. The practice is not about being perfect. It is about returning again and again to the standard you have set for yourself. These are the principles I want you to carry forward from here. Write them down if you need to. Keep them somewhere you will see them on the hard days. Silence is not the absence of connection. It is its deepest expression. The person who can be fully still is the person everyone eventually trusts with their truth. Listening is not something you do while waiting to speak. It is the whole point of the conversation. Your presence is your most powerful asset, and it costs nothing to give fully. Every pause before you respond is a vote for the person you are becoming. The person you are in the process of becoming is already visible in small moments you might be too close to notice. The conversation last week where you held back your immediate reaction and said something that actually helped. The moment you put your phone away and looked someone in the eyes long enough for them to say something real. The morning you sat in the quiet without immediately filling it and found something clear waiting for you there. That person who listens before speaking, who can sit with difficulty without running from it, who makes every room feel safer for their presence, is not a future version of you that requires years to arrive. That person is who you already are when you give yourself the stillness to remember it. Silence is not where life pauses. Silence is where life speaks the truth. Everything you have been searching for in the noise, the clarity, the connection, the confidence that does not shake, it was always there, waiting for you to stop long enough to hear it. That is the power of intentional silence.
Not just what you stop doing,
but what you finally, fully become. If this audiobook gave you something real, subscribe to this channel and stay on this journey with me. The next audiobook goes even deeper into how to stop seeking external validation and build the kind of unshakable inner peace that belongs to you completely. Share this with someone who needs it today. And until next time, keep growing,
keep choosing.
keep becoming.